Hello and welcome. Today I'm adding Kudzu from the Mega Cat Collection 3 to my ever-growing list where I rank every Evercade game ever. Kudzu is a top-down adventure game for the Game Boy, developed as a sort of love letter to the classic Zelda games. I believe, like most modern indie games for the Game Boy and such, that Kudzu was developed in GB Studio, which no doubt is a great tool. I have dabbled with it myself, but many of the games developed with it do seem a little bit sluggish at times, or have some kind of performance issues. Not always massively detrimental, but it tends to be there, and I've no idea if this is a limitation of the game engine or more down to optimization. And I'll mention this as Kudzu does have some performance issues, but I'll come back to those later.
Story.
You play as Max, an apprentice gardener whose mentor has disappeared while researching a facility overrun by genetically engineered strain of Kudzu. The plant has gone out of control, mutating wildlife, blocking paths, and yet there's a whole story there. But the main setup is fairly simple, and despite the game being very Zelda-like, it has a fairly unique flavour.
Graphics.
I'd say the graphics are generally quite solid for the most part. Everything is clean and readable. It has that usual Game Boy 4-shade palette style. Everything looks pretty nice. It looks as you'd expect for the type of game. There is some slowdown, and there is one area in particular where I found the visuals were a little bit harder to pass, but for the most part it does a good job. Although that one area I mentioned, it also features some of the worst slowdown. The bosses often look pretty good as well, and the presentation as a whole is generally decent.
Sound and music.
The sound effects are decent, nothing to write home about, but they more than do the job. Really can't think of much else to say. The music, well, there's not a huge amount of variety of different tunes, but it suits the atmosphere, it's melodic, it's not too irritating or too repetitive, so all in all I'd say the music is pretty decent as well.
Gameplay.
As mentioned, it's very much inspired by the Zelda games, but one with its own identity, which is a sort of pulpy science fantasy type thing. The overall tone is slightly quirky but earnest. The writing isn't too bad, certainly not amazing, but it's good enough to carry the game well. As you work your way through the adventure, you'll get extra weapons and items which allow you to access areas which were previously gated off. There's a number of different areas, characters to talk to, tents with save points and beds where you can rest and recoup your health points. You also have items you'll pick up for currency and health. There's a number of little puzzles, some are flipping switches or a number of switches, and there's things like block-based puzzles and what have you. I was actually quite impressed with some of the puzzles compared to many other indie games. While they weren't hard to work out, they were interesting enough rather than being so obvious there's no thinking involved, although they really won't take you long to work out. The combat is very simple. You have one attack, you hit enemies. There are a few enemies which require a specific tactic to beat, and the occasional ranged threat. The bosses are either a fairly simple pattern to recognise and work around, or they're puzzle based. None of them are overly challenging, but they mix things up a bit and give you an idea of your progression.
Overall opinion.
I like this one. It's not what I call an amazing game, but it is a solid little adventure. I say little. It will take you somewhere between 4 and 6 hours to beat, depending on how thorough you're going to be. Well, I'm not sure how replayable it will be. There were a couple of things I didn't manage to do in my playthrough. Yes, as I mentioned earlier, there are some performance issues with the slowdown, and I noticed a bug. There's these puzzles which involve you having to destroy some Kudzu roots, and there'll be 3 or 4 you have to destroy. However, if you button mash when you're attacking them, when you're doing the final blow that is, you may even get 2 blows in before it registers the dialogue box that comes up, meaning it counts that you've destroyed 2 rather than just 1. So you could shortcut certain elements of the game doing that, but it's hardly a deal breaker, nor is the slowdown. So all in all, I would say it's a pretty good Zelda-like, and it's worth a playthrough.
Ranking.
Placing Kudzu on my overall list where I rank every Evercade game ever, I've elected to put it above Exelon, but below Nyx the Paradox Relic. placing it at 177 out of 414 games that I've ranked so far. As you'll have noticed, I didn't do any kind of first impression reaction to Mega Cat Collection 3 or Activision Collection 2. I did start to record one, but my initial reactions to both carts was quite negative, but I could see that a lot of the games would need time to grow on me, so I've elected to just do it straight this way, do my ranking videos as I finish the games, or play enough of them to get a good opinion of if they're not finishable, and I'll do an overall cart review when I've finished everything on them, well, where possible. But anyway, that's enough for today's video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.